really happy to have Chris Daniel joining us today. Chris is a former software developer who decided to embrace his passion for strategy, amongst many other things. Since then, he's learned a lot about building strategies at work, and he's often helped individuals and organizations find their next step when they're working through essentially an understanding of their environment and their overall strategy challenges and problems. Chris is really well known in the space around his work with Wardley Maps, and today he's going to be spending a little bit of time with us, helping us understand this important concept and tool in strategy and planning. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Chris to get things started.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I hope you will enjoy this session. I have prepared for you a very short presentation about how to handle uncertainty with the help of Wardley mapping. And I have to admit, I'm still not sure where the focus should be, whether I should be focusing more on uncertainty or whether I should be focusing more on Wardley mapping. That's why the plan that I have prepared for you today consists of 3 simple steps. First one is the crash course to Wardley mapping. And when I say crash course, I mean an absolute crash course. It usually takes a couple of hours to go through all the important concepts. It takes 20 minutes in my most, let's say, aggressive workshop groups. We will do it in probably 5 to 10 minutes. And I hope you will be able to use that knowledge in practice. And then I will walk you through an example, not through the theoretical steps on about how to remove uncertainty from projects, because I think you have heard the theory about it perhaps earlier before. I deeply believe it's practice which is important. So I've prepared a use case and we will try to analyze it and remove the uncertainty from the project, both external one and internal one. So to start, the most important concept of Wardley mapping, and by the way, Wardley mapping is a tool for building shared situational awareness and defining your strategy. The most important concept in that framework is the concept of evolution. We will learn how to use it a little bit later. So what is evolution? I have put a large number of hours how to draw this particular graphics, but this is evolution explained in the world of Wardley mapping I think in a pretty simple way. So when a new capability, activity, system, product, or whatever is created, nobody really knows what does it do. It's complete unknown. And what happens? We get multiple incarnations, multiple implementations. Each of those is getting slightly better, more defined. People learn how to use it. And as they learn how to use it, the thing gets spread into the market, finally to reach a phase where everyone is using it. It's a boring cost of running business, and we don't want to think about it. I will give you an example in a second. It can be, the evolution can be to some extent replaced with the potential clarity. So if you don't have knowledge about particular capability, it doesn't mean that it's on the left-hand side. It just means that you have to check whether there is knowledge available in the market, because if it is, you may have a knowledge gap, and that's the simplest way to remove, let's say, uncertainty from your project. We will operate under the assumption that you have already done this step. You have explored the market, you know what is possible. So things that are left are things which nobody else figured out. To explain evolution in a bit more detail. Evolution goes from left to right. The first stage of the evolution is genesis. Genesis means that you are performing an experiment which is highly unpredictable, and because it's an experiment, it doesn't have commercial value at this point in time. It may have some value in the future, and because it doesn't have commercial value right now, there is no market. This is a capability or a thing which broadens people's minds, which perhaps uncovers some new knowledge, but it's very far from being practically used. And if you think about electricity, the example would be a Baghdad battery, because we know that ancient people were capable of generating electricity, but we really have no idea whether this electricity was useful in anything in particular. What happens next? And now depending on how do you look at humanity. If you think people are greedy in general, that's one motivation. If you think people want to improve things, that's another motivation. But what happens? People look at the results of experiments and they try it to put to work in their environment. And this is how we are getting into the custom build phase. In a custom build phase, you are looking for a use case, but you can't buy a solution of the market because it doesn't exist yet. You have to build it yourself or have it built for you. And because it has to be built for you and nobody did it before, the chances that it will fail are relatively high. But if you succeed in a right domain, what you have built will be a potential source of competitive advantage. With the stress on potential source of competitive advantage. What happens next? People look at the first few implementation of custom built solutions, and there will be a smart person or a group of people who will put a label on what this thing does, how does it work, and will try to evaluate how much it should cost. And this is the moment where a true product is being born. Product happens when you have a description, short description, what this thing does and how much does it cost. And in this moment, the market appears because suddenly, if you have a particular need, somebody can offer to you a product which will address that need. And that means that you can also do, as an adopter, a mental check whether this product will do what you want it to do. There is a trade, things are being bought and sold, and there is an increasing predictability of what this thing will do. This applies also to practices, right? So on the left-hand side, we've got experimental practices. Here we got good practices. And at the end, we get to the stage of a commodity. And commodity means that this thing, I've said it, is so boring that you don't want to think about it. There is a number of characteristics about how you are supposed to access that thing. So it should be a no-brainer, very easy to access, very available, very well known, and everyone should be using it in a given market. And the value added is relatively low because it's a cost of running business. So at this point in time, I will ask you a question. Does it sound reasonable? You can type into the chat, yes, no. I will take one as yes. I can see the chat. I've got it. Yes, awesome. Thank you, OJ. So what you also have to learn is that things on the left-hand side, Genesis and custom build, are heavily unpredictable. There is no way that you can even think of how to do that stuff in advance. You can't plan. And it isn't that, I mean, it doesn't matter how much time do you spend on planning, you can't discover how those things can work. A major source of issues with, let's say, projects which happen in my environment is that customers tend to say that they want certain Genesis and custom build stuff delivered according to their specification, but they are not aware that this is custom build specification. I will address that comment. Genesis and custom build cannot be specified, and if somebody is trying to specify it, they are making a big assumption and a big bet, which usually doesn't work. Things on the right-hand side can be specified and therefore are subject to a very good trade. Troy, I'm not trying to talk here. I mean, the concept of evolution isn't really about whether this is desired or not. This is the recognition of the fact that what starts as a highly unpredictable capability or skill or anything, over time becomes commodity. You may take certain actions to make this transition slower, but you basically got very little choice about it, if at all. But you can make quite substantial money out of the commodity because the market starts growing there. So it heavily depends on the context, whether this is desired or not. Now, what is super important about evolution is that inside one label, so inside Genesis, inside custom, product, or commodity, replacement rarely brings significant value. Actually, if you think about it, if you try to employ an experiment in a working solution, you have a transition from Genesis to the custom, and you get a breakthrough. Everyone gets excited about it. If you have a working solution and you create a product, you create an entire market. This is also a very big thing, and early in this phase, the market will be growing like crazy. If you try to replace product A with product B, so one product with another, this is always a surprise if it happens, because differences between products, they are rarely big enough. Then you have product to commodity replacement, and this creates revolution. So it wasn't the invention of electricity which changed the world, or the invention of the internet, or the invention of a computer, or even a programmable computer. It was this last transition where those things shifted from product to commodity. So it was really the cloud and the internet, the cheap enough and affordable internet, which revolutionized our life. Earlier, it was electricity. Perhaps at some point in time, it was railways or steam engines, but it's this shift which really changes how the market works. Of course, if you are looking at this from a business perspective, any of those shifts, except the first one, perhaps first one too, but any of those things are a good position to make money. But if you are first in this particular place, then this provides a significant opportunity to your company. And finally, replacement of a commodity with a commodity, it's nearly impossible, because if something is a de facto standard, and I mean de facto standard, like for example, right-hand side traffic, then you can't easily change it to the left-hand side because too much stuff depends on it. So you have to carry on with the existing standard, even if it's not very efficient. Now, I would like you to store that knowledge that we have described at this point in time, because we will use evolution in a second. But before we get there, I would like to remind a particularly interesting statement about strategies, perhaps not even about strategies, but in general about complexity, uncertainty, personal goal management, and all that stuff, that it is all about conflicting goals that cause grinding. If you have goals that conflict with each other, you will not be able to move or to execute or to improve your life, because you will be switching your focus all the time, and you will be doing actions, or you will be performing actions which contradict each other. Sometimes those conflicting goals are explicit, sometimes they aren't. But if you want to effectively remove uncertainty, you have to find your North Star. You have to find something that will orient all of your efforts towards one goal. And finding this goal isn't actually a trivial task. So let me guide you through an example. I will use the example of a Mobius desk. This isn't exactly a well-known company, but it's an excellent learning opportunity. Those people are building custom desks after hours. There is one or two persons which manage that business. And I will guide you through the process of building a map of that business and removing uncertainty, and perhaps proposing a product. Yes, OJ, which would help in their business. So how do you start looking for your desk sales? You need to think about your potential customers, and you position them on a map starting from the top. So there is the pro desk user, because I imagine that's the only person who is willing to pay a premium for high quality desk. And in order to deliver the high quality desk, you need to assemble the desk, and you need to build the configuration together with a desk user. To build a configuration and to assemble a desk, you need tabletop, accessories, legs, and lifting. And all those things sit in the product space because you can trade them or you can acquire them from a third-party vendors. Assembling is product/commodity because it's fairly, you don't need a lot of preparation or teaching in order to be ready to do that job. Configuration is in the custom space because it's the most difficult concept or the most difficult capability in this particular business. If the customer chooses a particular tabletop, accessories, legs, and lifting, will those things work together, and will they deliver the value to the user? This is custom because currently, for those people, they can't envision how to even codify it. They use human judgment, and human judgment, varies from one case to another one. They need, in order to build tabletop, they need materials, they need some tools, they need phone and email, because this is how they work. They basically, potential customers have to call them in order to configure their desk, and they need some support lines. And what we have just did, we've built a Wardley map. So we started from the user, which is the anchor or the North Star. We have identified the key user need. We have identified all the things that are needed to satisfy that user need. And if I proceed with this map to the next slide, this one is, if you think about the opportunities, what can you do to make that business a little bit more efficient? Because, as I have said, this is a couple of friends running this business after hours as a side gig, and they've got here, I would say, 4 opportunities. One, they can improve their support, and instead of relying on phone or email, introduce a product or even a service from a third party, which will help them execute it a bit more efficiently. They can try to build the configuration engine so that users are capable of building the configurations by themselves without having to phone or email the company. They will just have to deal with the order. They can finally use robots to assemble the desks, or build an inventory system which will procure parts that are needed to assemble the desks that customers want. If you were to choose where that this company should focus, what would be your option or options? Scott typed configuration. Any other takes? Okay, so the whole point about configuration is that it is indeed one of the best options because it sits in the custom space. It is the source of uncertainty in this entire business. If you think about it, if you combine the Wardley mapping approach, that this is custom stuff, very specific to the customer and to the person assembling the desk, it changes frequently. So if there will be errors happening or mistakes, they will be happening on this particular line. If you want to make this entire business more efficient, you need to tackle uncertainty first, which is remove the configuration from the picture. But that's not the end of the story, because what happens then is there are some conflicts going on here, especially if you think that pro desk users, they want not only the high quality desk, but they want to signal value. They want to show that they value high quality desks, and that actually involves some sort of brand definition, website, and the website creator. And what you get here is a very interesting conflict, because let me just draw it. You get a conflict between a brand definition and a potential future configuration wizard. Why is that? Because if the product user wants to signal value, then automatic configuration here on a website isn't really that. Automatic configuration gives you the sense or the vibe of something being mass-produced or automated, and therefore being a little bit less valuable, than stuff done by hand. And therefore, what we've added to the map is the brand definition. And for this particular company, brand definition sits in the Genesis space, which means that they are building those pro desk user high quality desks, but they have really no idea what are the selling points and why customers are buying from them. You get here a conflict, potential conflict. So again, this stuff may conflict with this one. And in order to resolve that conflict, you actually have to spend time either trying to understand or experimenting with why people are buying from you. You can't really commit to building a configuration tool unless you understand better why customers are buying stuff. I mean, you can, of course, but that will not be optimal, because if you spend time doing this one, and it turns out that your customers hate it because they've lost this part of the value that they were getting, then you've made a serious mistake. You don't want to do that. What we are doing here, we have shown the entire landscape or the environment of the business. We've identified key moving parts, and we are trying to have a what if game. What will happen if I do this? What will happen if I do that? And this is frankly the primary tool that I use for definition of strategies. Let's move a little bit forward. So what we are seeing here again is the conflict, and the conflict becomes like this. Okay, I've drawn it at least 2 times. Brand definition, will configuration and brand definition, if they are in conflict, what are the options here? And there are 2 options, because you can take a very tech first approach and say the configuration goes to the web goes to the user, and the user has to configure the desk by themselves, which means we don't care about brand definition. And the other use case is that, again, what you are doing, you are adding somewhere here person. Okay, I will not type the right person using my Wacom pen, because that will be terrible. Introduce a person and say that this person interacts with a product user, does this signaling value part, configures the desk for the user, but is using the configurator to speed up this entire process. Draw a person, fine, I'm drawing a person. So there is this person, there is this human touch. And in this particular way, what you have got here, you've got this person delivering this premium value to the desk user willing to pay a lot of money. And this person here will never see that below this entire system, somewhere here, right, you can cut it off. This stuff is visible, this stuff is invisible. This person will never see that here there's a web configurator which is capable of in the future sending specification of the table to the robots, and they are paying for high premium value stuff, whereas below the business line, they've got almost high volume production. But we don't know which direction should we go. So I've took the liberty to try to let's say what are the to identify key functionalities for both cases and find the differences. And it turns out that the difference is only here and here. Essentially, if you are doing Jack, that's a very good option. But let me get there, because this is the conclusion that we will arrive to. So if you do self-serving and or human handling and an activity aid, the only difference that you will get is perhaps user interface. One is customer facing, one is an internal application, and everything else has to be the same. If you need to visualize desk, it doesn't matter whether you are doing it by yourself or whether somebody is doing for you. There might be some differences in terms of the flow. This stuff is expected to work faster and look nicer, but the key functionality remains the same for both applications, which actually shows us that if you cut off this stuff, yeah, everything can be implemented always without any risk for the business. This is the part that is risky. This is the part where is the uncertainty. So what I typically suggest doing next is we try to put that analysis in a form of a map. We are expanding customer who wants to get a desk. There is a salesperson. There is a configuration. This one is optional, but we don't have a standard for marking optional lines. There is a whole set of functionalities which you need to implement here. Estimated time of arrival, scheduling, procurement, assembling, visualizing. There is this process of assembling a desk and configuring it. So you need to pick a number of things. You need to have a database of parts, and you need to have constraint resolution, which is the most important aspect. So which is, what do you do if, for example, a tabletop doesn't work with a particular height adjustment mechanism because it's too heavy? Or what if, let's say, certain accessories don't work with a certain tabletop? This is the stuff that was solved by a person. It's custom, and everything else can be, I think, easily automated apart from this process, because this process, it should be marked, depends on the constraint resolution. So what you do if you want to minimize the risk? A part of Wardley mapping is this philosophy of crossing the river by filling the stones. What does it mean? That the long-term plan rarely work. You have to focus on here and now and experiment as much as you can to remove the uncertainty. So if you think about this business, in order to remove uncertainty first, because if you are able to remove uncertainty, the project will be safe. If you are not able to remove the uncertainty, you want to figure it out as early in the process as possible to keep the risk and reward ratio. So what you want to do for this project, because right now we are talking about a project or a product that can be built, but not the entire environment. You want to mock this part. You don't want to spend much more time than needed implementing this, because that's not uncertainty. Those are simple things that you can build quite easily, perhaps with a little bit of challenge about which data do you need to have in this database. If you get a mock database with all those things, you can try to build a tool, a proof of concept, which will guide a user, internal or external one, through the process, and which will help them resolve constraints. And if you get this one working, not sooner, because this is a critical step in this entire landscape, in this entire journey, if you get this one working, you can think about types of experiments that you have to run in order to verify which of those approaches, going directly to a configurator or going through a salesperson to a configurator, is a right way to go. Perhaps some of you would say that it would be good to start with this one in the first place. That would be absolutely true. But the whole point is that we want to avoid building lots of expensive stuff before we conduct the experimentation. So when we have a mock of this, have a process of this, and we have put all the experiments that we need, one or the other adoption, we can do the 80% of work, the usual 80% of work in terms of time and effort, which delivers mostly product and commodity value. It's not that differentiating, but the customers should see it. And if it doesn't work, they will be unhappy. Whereas the 20% of the most risky work here will be solved as early in the project as possible. How projects go typically wrong? Oh, and by the way, I'm using the project and product almost interchangeably. I know this is wrong, but what we are talking here about is the difference that if you do it as a company for yourself, it will be rather a project. If you are doing this part here as an external company, hoping to aim desk sales businesses, then it will be your product. The difference is very subtle in financing, at least for me. So how projects go wrong, or product launches, how they can go wrong? Typically, if you do an upfront specification here, here, and here, you end up with a lot of uncertainty in your project schedule or a roadmap. What happens there if you try to implement that? And by the way, this stuff, especially here, is impossible to specify in advance. So if you try to implement that, what will your team most probably do? They will start with implementing things they can do quite easily. So the first functionalities you will get will be this one and this one. And what you will get at the end, or perhaps after launch, you will get Pikachu face, because those things don't work as expected. Lots of frustration, lots of litigation possible. You don't want to get into that situation. So if I were, oh, one more thing. This thing on the right-hand side, and you will hate me for it, is perfectly suitable for waterfall. Since you can describe it very well, since there is almost no uncertainty in that space, there is nothing wrong in describing it once and implementing it for the rest of the time. Whereas this stuff on the left-hand side, this one, this cannot be specified, so it should be done with frequent checks with the customer or customer representative in order to verify that we are working in the right direction. So you are getting here one size doesn't fit all, because almost any project needs to connect two methodologies. One stuff, low agility and low interaction, because the knowledge is there and you know what to do. And the other plan, highly adaptable methodology to deal with the uncertainty. If I were to define one takeaway that I would like you to take from this lecture, it's just this statement: uncertainty first. Identify uncertainty and tackle it first before committing any further resources. If you want to go into a bit more details, I have this diagram here. So if your customer-facing space, internal space, That is the stuff that just has to happen. That is the stuff that makes your product stand out. Those are custom solutions or custom features that nobody else have. This is where you require experimentation. Here is just planning. In the ideal situation, you want to assemble those features and those features from components you get from third parties, because this stuff is invisible to the customer, and most of the time customers don't care who are you getting it from. They just want this stuff to work. And if you find yourself having Genesis and custom stuff invisible to the customer, then you have to start asking serious questions about what are you getting by having those custom things. Sometimes this might be a competitive advantage, but very frequently it was a competitive advantage a long time ago. The market has moved to the product or commodity, and this is just a source of mistakes and cost in your organization. With that said, I've said everything what I have to say, so perhaps I will invite now questions and comments.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate that. Just 2 seconds here. I'm going to get us on the correct view of things. There we go. Now we can see each other. Maybe I'll just kick things off with a question just while we wait for anybody else to interject with some of their thoughts on this side. But I guess I'm really curious, I guess in particular, about the discoverability of use cases between that sort of custom built phase and the product part of that, and how we avoid the challenges of too much burn, essentially, to get to that discovery. So to use an example, in early stage startups, one of the classic challenges we have is we have a ramp of time and capital and resources that we can expend essentially before we essentially burn through everything that we've got to get to essentially that discoverability of the right use cases, that product market fit, as people often call it. Like how do we I guess jump the gun or get through that problem space a little more efficiently on that side? And I know a big part of that maybe in your diagram is experimentation, but I guess I'm curious on your thoughts there.
Okay, so if you are a startup, right, and you are working in a particular field because you have knowledge of a particular field, this diagram is perhaps the most important one. And those are transition between different states. So if you do a map of a particular field, you will find that you are capable as a startup of moving some of the components either from custom into the product space, or from product or from product to commodity. So this is this shift. Now, moving product to commodity is the one that requires almost no, let's say, no lead time, because if product is mature and you can move it to commodity, commodity means that you will make something 10 times more accessible and perhaps 10 times cheaper. So if you know a product which you can do shift to the commodity, I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? Mm-hmm. You just do it, no work required. Things are a little bit more difficult earlier. If you are fighting product to product, then I'm afraid I don't have a good news. My personal taste or approach is to avoid that type of situation all the times. If you are saying you will build a better product, it's like trying to build a better office suite that one of the big companies is doing right now. You can succeed in a short time, but sooner or later, they will copy all the features that you have. That's the different strategy. They just need to copy that stuff. So being successful is almost impossible. Don't even try to do that stuff. And this one is interesting, because what you are saying is that there are custom activities which are expensive for people to perform, and nobody yet thought that there can be a company that is capable of doing it, that there is a product which can help to make that happen, right? And again, I have this is a risky game, but possible. The key challenge here is reaching those people who do it in a custom way and convincing them that they can do it a little bit more efficiently than the product. And bear in mind that they may have no idea that they perform a certain activity, and they may not want to move to the product because this is what they are selling in the market. Think of it, I mean, let me give you an example. What typically happens, or what, let's say, what Craigslist did. If you think what you had in the past, you have people who put announcement, let's say on the street, on the post, or in designated places, or in the press. You had potential buyers, and those two types of users, they were doing custom transactions and specifying each time what are the conditions of the transactions, where should they meet, how should they operate, etc., etc. What perhaps Craigslist or what Amazon did, they've standardized this approach. So there is a predefined set of conditions under which transaction happens. And that means that you have a volume which went up because there is no risk, or much less risk, for both parties in this game. So if you are a startup and if you have a particular focus, which I think you should be doing, is trying to understand what are the key moving parts in your environment and where can you put your effort to make things more predictable.
Yep.
Does it make sense? Did it answer your question?
No, it did. It did. Thank you. That's really good. One question here from Manish. Very curious to understand more about commodity to commodity substitution. Do you have an example that shows seamless substitution and another that is impossible?
Right. The impossible substitution. I suggest you to search for the I think it was Black Sunday. I'm not sure about it, but about the switch of the left-hand side traffic, the UK style, to the right-hand side traffic, to the, let's say, rest of the Europe style in Sweden in 67.
Yeah,
that was absolute disaster. But because it was, I mean, it required changing all the rules, behaviors, and dependent practices at once. UK has evaluated this transition much later, I think in the 90s, but I'm not sure. But I'm sure it evaluated the transition and said that's too expensive because too much stuff depends in the country on how do we drive, right? And they said that this is virtually not possible. So right-hand side versus left-hand side traffic, this is the example that I'm typically giving of a transition which is not possible of a well-established standard. Now, about the transition between different commodities, yes, they do happen, but they happen in a slightly different way. Because what is getting here, you can get, if you are a provider of a commodity, what may happen here, you may get a standard, which is called the API. I mean, you all familiar with that stuff. And API isolates the real implementation from the vendor. What typically can happen is that there will be a more efficient commodity playing up with the same standard. This will go unnoticed because you will probably switch a vendor and it will just work. Otherwise, we are talking here about a situation where regulator comes and says, this is wrong, let's do something else. So it would be like an equivalent of a regulator, energy regulator coming here to Europe and saying, this power is wrong, let's use the US version, something like that from a particular day. Only the regulator has the power to do that, unless there are some external events which render the entire standard useless, because those things, I think, happen from time to time too. Did it answer your question?
We'll assume it did.
Fine.
I'm going to ask a question maybe just about the technique of the mapping.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's lots of dimensions to this to think about, lots of different complexities. What are some of those early mistakes that people make when they're creating a Wardley map?
spending too much time on it. Frankly, I mean, this is a simple Wardley mapping. If you think about it, the primary value of Wardley mapping is creating this sort of diagram and having this sort of discussions. So what you want to do, I mean, in the beginning, okay, so Simon Wardley, the creator of Wardley mapping, says all models are wrong, some are useful. So what you want to do is you want to jot something down as soon as possible and talk it through with other people. You don't want to be waiting a couple of months, days, or years to be sure that your map is perfect, because it never will be. And once you uncover it, once you create your map, you can have a discussion about what will happen if you change the brand definition. And this is the worst part for me and the most difficult part for me to accept in the beginning. This is context-specific knowledge. This is domain-specific knowledge, right? How the brand definition will impact the behavior of the user. What the map does, it just puts the structure and helps you visualize dependencies. So, for example, you can think about what will be the impact of the website creator through this route, right, on the value. This is what you get from a technical aspect of the map. But what you want to do, analyze key moving parts and start talking about them with other.
Yeah. So it's a conversation. It's a conversation tool as much as anything. And I think what maybe people get locked into from what it sounds is like overworking the diagram and not having the conversation, maybe.
Or trying to get it right? Because some people will think brand definition isn't Genesis, it's commodity. But if you start arguing about that, and this argument isn't resolved in 2 minutes, then you are probably wasting your time. I mean, not wasting, but there are better uses of that time when you are creating a map. Just get it done and iterate it and improve it continuously, and you will finally get it there.
Yeah, no, that's great. People that are interested in learning more about this technique, where should they start? Where should they go? I
think there's a website, learnwardleymapping.com or .net, but I don't remember. Don't remember.
It's .com.
Yeah, .com. Yeah. There is also my old webpage, wardleymaps.com, but I'm not maintaining it actively anymore, so beware.
Okay, well, that's great. And anything else you want to share on this side? I don't think we have any other questions essentially on this end.
I think we're good.
All right, wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for joining us. I'm just going to share screen here and share a few more additional details with our audience and stuff, and then we'll wrap things up for today. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. That was really great to have you, and appreciate the conversation and questions today. We'd love to get your feedback on today's session. If you have a moment to give us, it'd be really great to be able to share that feedback with Chris, what you found helpful and what was really great for you today. And if you want to continue the conversation or discussion, feel free to open any kind of questions or conversations inside our community. We'd be happy to get into any conversations there and continue answering anything that maybe come to mind as people go off and explore some of this. Lots of other things going on here in the community and other ways to get involved as well. Next week, we have JJ Rory joining us around the 5 immutable truths for great product managers. We have our Product Makers Book Club coming up. Katja and Daniel talking about a scalable approach to product leadership. Matt Wallert joining us at the end of the month as well. And then events coming up in October with David Reimer and Josh Seiden as well. So feel free to keep an eye out for some of our other great product events on that side. We also have our Maker Mentor program, which allows you to get matched with other thought leaders inside product, meet other people and make relationships on that side. Our round tables that happen every month, our Meter Maker program, and also our speaking opportunities like these. Maybe you've got something like Chris that you want to share with the rest of our product community. Please feel free to let us know, and we'd be happy to entertain that conversation. Again, thank you everybody for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. And we hope you get a chance to share this with some other people and found this really super helpful on that side. Take care. Have a great day. Thanks, Chris.
Bye-bye.